So the first panelists we're going to hear from today are Kim Elsbach, who's a professor emerita at the UC Davis School of Management, Aruna Raghunathan, an associate professor at the Haas School of Business in UC Berkeley, Mike Pratt, who is a professor at the Carroll School of Management at Boston College, and Siobhan O'Mahony, who's a professor at the Questrom School of Business at Boston University. And the questions that we pose for our panelists for this session is the do's and the don'ts of mixed methods. And we'll hear a different perspective, both from people who are more enthusiastic and less enthusiastic about how can we use mixed methods design to discuss this. So Kim, please go ahead and start your presentation.
Sure. Good morning, everyone from sunny California in the US. Welcome. I am going to just start my slideshow. Okay. Today, I'm going to talk about mixed methods as full cycle research, and specifically the combination of qualitative case study research for theory building with surveys and experimental studies for theory testing. So first, I would like to talk a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses of qualitative case study research for theory building. For those of you who do qualitative case study research, you already know this, but case study research is really good for producing accurate theory. That is theory that describes variables and relationships that are faithful to the specific context in which they were studied. And as a result of this context richness, they can answer why and how questions, why things are happening, how things are unfolding. As a result, they can reveal processes and they can illustrate relationships. On the other side, qualitative case studies are not so good for building theory that is simple and generalizable because it is so specific to the context, and so because it has so much contextual richness, it ends up being highly complex in many ways and also very specific to the context that you're studying. These strengths and weaknesses illustrate some trade-offs in research methods that are included in Weich's GAS model of methodological trade-offs. He uses the acronym GAS, G-A-S, to stand for three components of very useful theory. That is, being general, accurate, and simple. But he also contends that any single research method can at most achieve two of these three outcomes. So, for example, single case studies can achieve accuracy, but not, as I said, simplicity or generalizability. If you do multiple qualitative case studies, you can move more towards generalizability because you're studying more contexts, but you're still not going to get to simplicity. On the other hand, survey studies can be simple because you can focus on a few variables, and they can be generalizable because you can survey across wide populations and lots of different populations, but they're not going to be as accurate because they lack context. To manage these trade-offs, I'm going to propose that we use something called full cycle research. That's been defined by Robert Cialdini way back in 1980. And full cycle research is an open-ended sequence of studies that build, test, and refine theory, and that often the sequence involves a variety of methods, which will then lead to theory that's more accurate, generalizable, or simple than would be possible with any single method. So, for example, you might sequence multiple case studies that qualitative case studies that build generalizable or more generalizable and accurate theory with a experimental lab study to test a portion of the theory generated in the case studies to give you more simplicity. Or you might sequence a single qualitative case study that gives you a very accurate theory with survey studies that provide a test of a portion of that theory to provide you with more simplicity and generalizability. So to manage these trade-offs in research methods you can sequence in this full cycle way. Now, I've done these two different kinds of sequences multiple times, but I'm just going to talk about a couple for quick illustrations. So the first illustration is a study that I did, and I realized today that it was published 30 years ago, which is impossible because I'm only 35. But nevertheless, this study involved multiple qualitative case studies and an experimental study. My goal in this study was to understand how organizations constructed effective verbal accounts following controversies that threaten their legitimacy. And I also wanted to understand relationships between those accounts and audience perceptions. So I wanted to understand these or answer these how questions, sort of process questions, and understand relationships. To do this, I decided I needed an in-depth context of organizations that were facing legitimacy challenges. And at that time, the California cattle industry was facing challenges to their legitimacy for all kinds of reasons, environmental and climate reasons, food safety reasons, water safety reasons. So this seemed like a good qualitative context. I did several case studies of organizations in that industry to build a broad and sort of context-rich framework about how these organizations responded to legitimacy threats. And then I took a few of the accounts that I found there and devised an experiment to test those, some of those ideas from the qualitative case study. So it was a nice way to test at least a portion of what I found from the qualitative study. A second, more recent example involves a case, a publication that I did with my colleague Dan Cable, who's at London Business School. And here the goal was to understand why people identify with collectives that are not high in prestige. Because perceived external prestige was the primary predictor of organizational or collective identification. But we all can identify organizations that are not high in prestige that still have identifiers. So here I wanted to study why this happens. And so I needed to build theory using a collective that was not high in prestige, but had identifiers. And I chose NASCAR, which is an auto racing collective in the United States only, where people race stock cars, which are cars like a Toyota Camry, which you and I could buy, but they're souped up. So I did a very in-depth qualitative case study of NASCAR fans trying to understand why they identified with the collective. And then a very large-scale survey to test some of the reasons why and compare that to prestige reasons. So again, this was the sequence of a single case study and a large-scale survey. I'm not going to go into details on those studies because you can read them yourself. But in summary, I just wanted to propose that full cycle research is great for managing trade-offs that you get when you use a single method. Specifically, if you're using qualitative case studies, you often can build theory that's very accurate, but not simple or generalizable. And you can manage those trade-offs by sequencing qualitative research with quantitative experimental studies or surveys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim, for this super interesting presentation. And Aruna, you are up next.